hard concept, I think, for those of us who are not scientists to get our heads around. As far as we know, the Earth is the only planet in the whole universe, as far as we know, that actually has intelligent life on it, or any kind of life that we're sure of. And the chances of that happening seem to be so infinitesimal. Why should that be? Can you at least understand why people who are prone to a theistic interpretation of life might say, well, look, isn't that just too amazing to have just happened by chance? Doesn't that sort of indicate that there's a God who wanted it and created us, created Earth with the moon in the right place and with Jupiter in the right place and with a friendly sun and a friendly solar system and all the rest of it?
Yes. Well, there's no doubt that our situation on this planet is comparatively friendly. I don't wish to concede at all that there is only one life form in the universe. I think it's probable that there is quite a lot of life in the universe. I think it's probably a very rare phenomenon, which means that any one of these little islands of life is probably rather unlikely to encounter any other of these islands of life. So it may be that all islands of life are blissfully unaware of each other's existence. It's a genuinely open question how rare life is. Now, let's go to one extreme and entertain the possibility that this is indeed the only planet in the entire universe where there is life. And then we have to say, well, what can we deduce from that? One thing that Paul has just pointed out is that we can say that this planet has certain very friendly properties. It's exactly the right distance from a star, from its star. If it was, it's the so-called Goldilocks zone. If it was, it's Goldilocks in the sense of just not too hot, not too cold, but just right. It's in the Goldilocks zone in the sense that if it were any closer to the sun, all the water would boil. And if it were any further from the sun, all the water would freeze. So there's quite a narrow band of orbits in which water remains liquid, which we need. There's also the moon, which has a certain stabilizing effect, which makes it possible for life to, or makes it easier, at least, for life to have evolved. There's Jupiter, which acts as a great big hoover to stop too many asteroids hitting us. Some do, nevertheless, but it's rare. One of the reasons is that Jupiter's there, acting as a great gravitational sink, pulling these missiles away. So there is a lot going for us in this solar system, and so there damn well has to be, because we're here. I mean, obviously, even if we're the only form of life in the universe, we would have to be, that the one planet where we are would have to be a planet which has those favorable characteristics, however rare such a planet is. Now, knowing, we don't know, but calculating, speculating, well, more than speculating, it's an informed calculation about how many planets there are in the universe. There must be actually a very large number which have at least those complaisant properties friendly to life. It may still be that only one of them actually has life, and that has a very interesting consequence, which I perhaps briefly explore. If anybody wishes to say that this is the only planet in the entire universe which has life, then a consequence of that would have to be that the origin of life, the chemical circumstances that gave rise to the first self-replicating molecule, the first proto-gene, the origin of life would have to be a quite fantastically, stupendously rare and improbable event. Because if it were not stupendously rare and improbable, it would be in lots of other planets as well as this one. So if we in theory imagine a spectrum of possibilities where on the one hand there's lots and lots of life all over the universe, on the other hand there's only one. In other words, on this end, the origin of life is a fairly probable chemical event. On that end, it's a colossally improbable, a stupefyingly improbable event. Nevertheless, because there are so many planets, stupefyingly improbable actually means it only happens once in the universe. And with hindsight, this is the so-called anthropic principle, with hindsight, that one planet has got to be this one, because we are the ones talking about it. We are the ones sitting here thinking about it. And so the anthropic principle is a very elegant, beautiful idea, because it has this curious paradoxical effect that it allows us to entertain a hugely improbable event and still come up with a satisfying, complete explanation for our own existence. And it's even possible to twist that argument further and say that because we've never actually been visited, as Enrico Fermi said, where are they? Because we've never been visited, you might deduce from that, or never even been visited by radio waves from a distant planet, you might deduce from that that intelligent life, at least technological life, is indeed very, very rare. And therefore, if it were easy for us to understand the origin of life, if chemists could come up and say, oh yeah, easy to see how life could originate in this way or this way or this way, we should be positively worried. Because if it's easy to think of how the origin of life happened on this planet, then there should be lots of other planets where it happened as well. So one corollary of the where are they question is that if there is life elsewhere in the universe, it's got to be non-technological life. Technological life has got to be rare, which means that either the origin of life itself is very rare, or the origin of life is allowed to be common, but the origin of advanced, intelligent, technological life has got to be very rare. Somewhere along the line, you've got to interpose a sort of wall of improbability in order to explain why we have never been visited.
NASA says that there's a very high chance a strong earthquake will shake LA. According to a study published in early October by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, there's a whopping 99.9% chance that Los Angeles will experience a serious earthquake in the next 2.5 years. Chances are high for a strong quake on or near two faults in Los Angeles County: the right lateral strike-slip Whittier Fault and the Puente Hills Thrust Fault. The two faults are responsible for the March 28, 2014 La Habra quake, which hit a magnitude of 5.1 and caused considerable damage in the San Gabriel Valley. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory says the La Habra quake caused a surprising amount of damage to local homes and businesses. NASA geophysicists say that within 60 miles from the 2014 quake site, there is a 99% chance that an earthquake measuring 5.0 or greater will occur in the next 3 years. There's also a 35% chance that a 6.3 magnitude quake will occur in the same area in the same time frame. According to CBS Los Angeles, seismologists at the U.S. Geological Survey have questioned these high probabilities. However, it still looks like Los Angeles residents should start investing in earthquake kits and practicing their drills. California earthquakes in the Salton Sea may awaken the big one. Southern California residents are on heightened alert for a major earthquake. More than 200 earthquakes detected in the Salton Sea last week have raised the chances of a much bigger earthquake hitting California this week. Experts are concerned this cluster of quakes may trigger a major earthquake along the San Andreas Fault. In 2008, experts came up with a scenario dubbed the Big One, where the San Andreas Fault would rupture. The ensuing 7.8 magnitude earthquake would claim 1,800 lives and injure 50,000 people. The Salton Sea quakes temporarily raised the chances of a major earthquake occurring on the San Andreas Fault to a maximum of 1%, 50 times higher than usual. The San Andreas hasn't ruptured in more than 3 centuries, and scientists say California is long overdue for a major quake. That being said, the chances of it happening most of the time are around 1 in 6,000. Cliffs collapse into sea in New Zealand earthquake. The Earth moved for these cliffs in New Zealand on Valentine's Day as a 5.7 magnitude earthquake struck. The cliffs collapsed into the South Pacific Ocean in several areas along coastlines surrounding the city of Christchurch yesterday. Footage shows huge clouds of dust rising into the air as parts of the cliffs retreated up to 5 meters or 16 feet. The epicenter of the earthquake was just 9 miles east of Christchurch, where a 2011 quake killed 185 people. This time, however, the city on New Zealand's South Island survived major damage, and no deaths were reported. But the cliffs weren't so lucky. No serious injuries were reported, but some climbers told media they were hit by falling rocks. New Zealand's seismological body GeoNet said that there were more than 40 aftershocks. Authorities in Christchurch said the quake shocked residents, but the city was stronger than it was 5 years ago. New Zealand quake leaves cows stranded on a tiny island. A devastating earthquake that struck New Zealand's South Island left 3 cows in a very troublesome predicament. The small east coast town of Kaikoura was hit with a 7.8 magnitude earthquake just after midnight on November 14th. The quake caused only 2 human casualties, but stranded roughly 1,000 tourists, hundreds of residents.
Why a building in Tainan, Taiwan collapsed in an earthquake. Controversy has arisen after the discovery of cooking oil tin cans inside the pillars of the 17-story building in Tainan, Taiwan that collapsed after an earthquake on February 6th. However, experts say they may not have been responsible for the building's collapse. A 17-story building in southern Taiwan's Tainan City collapsed after a 6.4 magnitude earthquake occurred on February 6th in the separate city of Kaohsiung. The building had survived a 7.3 magnitude earthquake that took place previously on September 21, 1999, because the intensity of that temblor was only a 4 compared to the 7 in the Kaohsiung earthquake. Experts say aluminum cans that were later found inside the walls of the building were used to enlarge the pillars without significantly increasing the weight, which was legal in Taiwan for buildings built before 1999. Steel rods inside the building were also found to be locked at 90-degree angles instead of 135-degree angles, which increased the risk of them becoming loose during an earthquake. The U-shaped building was built as 9 connected blocks. Without a fourth wall to hold the ends of the U-shape, the building fell in the opposite direction during the quake. More than 72 hours have passed since the earthquake struck. More than 120 people are still missing, and the death toll has risen up to 40.
Massive earthquake strikes Nepal, over 3,000 dead, thousands injured. Tragedy hit Nepal on Saturday after a disastrous 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck the country, killing and injuring thousands. Search and rescue operations are underway after what is being described as the worst earthquake to hit Nepal in 80 years. Reports indicate that over 3,200 people are dead and more than 6,500 were wounded as a result of the quake. To make matters worse, on Sunday a magnitude 6.7 aftershock struck the Kathmandu area, further terrifying thousands of already scared Nepalese. The BBC reports that 4 of the country's 7 UNESCO World Heritage Sites have been severely damaged, while several other tourism areas are in ruin. International aid and assistance poured into the country over the weekend, but the humanitarian crisis is worsening, with thousands displaced and too scared to re-enter their damaged homes.
March 11th marks the 3-year anniversary of the magnitude 9.0 earthquake and tsunami that struck off the east coast of Tohoku, Japan. The earthquake was the most powerful ever known to have hit Japan, and the 5th most powerful in recorded history. Tsunami waves triggered by the temblor reached heights of up to 40.5 meters and traveled up to 10 kilometers inland. It also moved Honshu, the main island of Japan, 2.4 meters east and shifted the Earth on its axis by estimates of between 10 and 25 centimeters. Months after the quake, a Japanese National Police Agency report confirmed more than 15,000 people were killed and more than 6,000 were injured, with more than 2,000 people still unaccounted for. And 3 years after the earthquake, life has still not quite returned to normal for many Japanese residents. Those whose homes were washed away or evacuated due to nuclear accidents caused by the earthquake and tsunami still reside in what were supposed to be temporary housing units. It was difficult for officials to put an exact figure on the monetary value lost in the natural disasters, but estimates put the figure in the millions or even billions of US dollars worth of coastal structures and habitats destroyed.
Indian Ocean tsunami, 10 years later. It has been a decade since a massive earthquake in the Indian Ocean caused the world's deadliest tsunami. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami occurred when the Indian plate subducted below the Burma Plate and triggered a 9.1 magnitude earthquake. The tsunami affected 14 countries, including India, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Maldives, Myanmar, Somalia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Bangladesh, South Africa, Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania, and the Seychelles, killing about 230,000 people and injuring 500,000. More than $15 billion in humanitarian aid was raised internationally to help affected areas rebuild. The Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System was constructed and put to use in 2006. Seafloor pressure sensors detect earthquakes and pass the information to a surface buoy, which transmits the data to a satellite and eventually to control centers on the ground. Ten deep ocean assessment and reporting buoys are deployed in the Indian Ocean. Regional tsunami service providers have been set up in Australia, India, and Indonesia to operate as tsunami advisories for the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System alerted the Indian islands of Andaman and Nicobar to the 2012 Banda Aceh 8.4 magnitude earthquake within 8 minutes.
Second earthquake in Nepal kills at least 42 people. Another strong earthquake shook Nepal on Tuesday, just weeks after a devastating quake that killed at least 8,000 people and wounded more than 17,000. Nepal's second strong earthquake in as many weeks struck near Mount Everest, not too far from the epicenter of the previous earthquake on April 25th. It measured 7.3 on the Richter scale, with a depth of 15 kilometers. Several buildings collapsed in Chaltara, about 30 miles from the epicenter. At least 42 people were killed. According to witnesses, the quake lasted about 40 seconds. It was also felt in Bangladesh and northern India. In India's Bihar state, at least 3 people were killed after a building wall collapsed.